Firstly, to apologise, I don't speak Polish, so I do apologise. But so what I'd like to go through in the next half hour is really to give you our view from Fortinet and my personal view as well of where DDoS is today and a little bit of history as to where it's come from. Just a little bit of background on myself. I mean, I've been working probably in security for about 15 years, but for 10 of those years, I've been focused on DDoS specifically. For nearly 5 of those years, I was the International Technical Director with Arbor Networks. And in fact, I was their first international technical employee. So really from a startup and watched them emerge as a market leader in the service provider environment. The one caveat that I'll put against that is, you know, we often refer to DDoS as very blasé or very off-the-cuff comment. Now, it's only 4 letters, but in security, it's probably one of the biggest subject matters we actually have. And the point, where I come from that at, is if you actually look at what these people are trying to do when they do a DDoS attack. Now, all they have to do is succeed in one single part of your infrastructure or network. What we have to do in mitigating DDoS is protect every part. So we've actually got a very tough job. Anyway, so I did a presentation in Hungary, in Budapest in October. And just over a 2-week period, I grabbed a number of press reports off the internet. Now, it was just about the time when Anonymous were attacking a number of US banks. There were a number of things ongoing, but simply, you know, if you actually look at the DDoS attacks that happened over a 2-week period, it's very interesting, or I find it very interesting. I'm a little bit cynical about the press, I have to say, but what I am and what I notice very clearly, now this isn't the press's fault, I'll say straight away, is the press have a very technical subject to report on. Now, what they're actually doing is reporting it to a very non-technical audience, typically. Now, that comes a problem. How can I measure or quantify the severity of an attack when I can't talk about it technically? Well, the fact of the matter is the only way that they can actually talk about it is in size. So how big is a DDoS attack? Is it 20 gig? Is it 5 gig? Is it 60 gig? Now, while that to layman out there means, you know, that puts it easily into their head and they can then quantify that, to the majority of technical people out there that understand DDoS in detail, it's actually not enough detail. And again, if I look historically, and we look historically at where DDoS has come from, that was more than adequate. But if we actually start to look at what DDoS attacks consist of today, it's very, very different. And I'll go through some examples of that as we move forward. So I don't think, you know, I need to tell the majority of people from network operators exactly where DDoS came from. The one point I will make is I've seen more change in DDoS attacks in the past 2 years than I have in the past 10 years. Now that's giving you some indication that things are moving, things are evolving. Now we all talk about evolving threats, we all talk about persistent threats, and we all talk about emerging threats. You know, all these different, we like to be able to classify. The challenge that we have with DDoS is it's never really stood still. Because the subject matter is so broad, and because the goal that these people are trying to achieve can be so vast, all they have to hit is one point, and if they're successful, they've won that war. You know, when we put up barriers, they're constantly coming up with new forms of attack and new ways of attacking us. So, not only am I saying this, there's a number of other reports that are coming out, and I'll go into a couple of others. But what we are finding now, and you know, from a network operator perspective and a service operator and a service provider perspective, you know, what is most important to you? Well, if you can break it down into different sizes of service providers typically. And gradually, you get the incumbent service providers, and especially in Europe. What has been important to them? Well, what are they measured on? The major goal that they're always measured on, or have been historically, is network uptime. Yeah? And that's important to them. And if we actually look at the origins of DDoS and the origins of those bulk volumetric attacks that were happening 10, 12 years ago, what was actually happening was it was taking out the service provider's infrastructure. Now, when I joined the company, I've been at the company about 9 months now, and when I joined, we commissioned a survey of our customers because we needed to get feedback from them to find out what they were saying, what they were seeing in the marketplace. And that's important, and I'll go through some of those results as well. But the important thing is people are now recognizing in the market that traditional measures are ineffective against today's DDoS attacks. So here's some of the results, and I highlight a couple of the red bits. There were lots of statistics and lots of values, but interestingly, more than 75% of the DDoS attacks that our customers were seeing were less than 1 gig. Now that is not what you'd believe if you read the press. You believe that every attack was 100 gig or more, and it was just thousands upon hundreds of thousands of botnets just attacking. That's not the case today. It's important for us to understand that. It is changing. Fewer than 10% more than 10 gig. But again, everybody focuses on size of the attack. Okay? Now, the important point here as well is at the top. For the first time ever in 2011, or from 2010 to 2011, something changed. The maximum size of a DDoS attack dropped. Again, it's not that the pipes got any smaller. It's not that you were supplying smaller bandwidth out to customers or consumers or infected hosts. What actually happened was the people that were initiating these attacks realized that the majority of service providers out there could stop bulk volumetric attacks very easily. And once you put up that defense, they have to come out with a new method of attack. Everybody thinks of DDoS as bulk volumetric. It's not. DDoS is about denial of service. How they do it, they don't care, as long as they do it. And that's important. Now, the other aspect is fewer than half of them knew why they were being attacked. I didn't have a clue. It could have been somebody that upset somebody. Again, if you read the press, though, and you believed everything that the press was saying, you believed that everybody was being blackmailed, from China to Russia to wherever, but you think it was for financial extortion. When I say a very small percentage, it was actually less than 5% was for any financial extortion whatsoever. So now we look at the cost of DDoS, and it is extremely difficult to quantify cost, I'll be very honest with you. So we had to give very broad questions to our customers. However, interestingly enough, virtually all of our financial services customers said it was more than $10,000 an hour. Now that's a significant amount of money if you estimate the average length of DDoS attacks today is greater than 24 hours. Now it might come away, it might go away, it might come back. We're not saying it's constant over that period, but what we are saying is it's ongoing. And interestingly enough, I sat on a question panel just after the New York attacks or the New York bank attacks, and we were being asked about, because it was anonymous that had initiated the attack, and I put a few questions to a couple of CISOs or senior security people within the financial organizations. And I said to them quite honestly, I said, are you actually worried about Anonymous and groups like Anonymous? And their answer off all of them was no. We're not actually that worried about those guys. So I asked, I had to ask, well, why not? He said quite easily, he said, they tell us what they're going to do before they do it. We can prepare for that. We can set up protection, we can prepare, we can set up analysis, we can watch the network very intensely. Now the problem that they do have is that those types of groups, and this is where they had put a caveat in it, They're actually getting smarter. They're getting cleverer. And what they are starting to do is do their research. And in fact, if you actually looked at the banks that were affected, what those hacktivists, or whatever group you want to call them, had actually managed to do was understand the back office systems of those banks. They knew the requests that they were putting in were gonna overload certain resources. And this is something we have to accept in our industry. No single resource is ever inexhaustible. And all they have to do is find one. So we have to understand very closely exactly what is exhaustible and how it's exhaustible. And really, if we start to now understand the DDoS solutions that are coming out today and how they've evolved from those bulk volumetrics, the Arbor type solutions, they actually don't lack granularity. I actually worked quite closely on the peak flow product, the Arbor product that a lot of service providers use today. And while I don't want to beat it up, it is very good at those volumetric attacks. It has limitations. And this is where the hacktivists out there know it's got limitations. So they know, and we had a decision in Arbor. We either had scalability or we had granularity. We couldn't have both. So what did we go for? Well, we were going after the largest service providers in the world. Did they need granularity? No. They were after protecting their infrastructure. So what did we give them? We gave them scalability. Today, however, if you actually look at the targeted DDoS attacks, they focus very finely on specific services. That's granularity. And it's not at layer 3, layer 4. It is at layer 7. And they are successful. Nobody wants to admit it all the time that they've been successful. Often, they'll only admit it when it's in the press that they have been DOSed. But at the end of the day, they're getting cleverer and they know what they're doing. So interestingly enough as well, current mitigation methods. More than half of the customers that we surveyed, and maybe it's our fault this, but they were actually using existing technology to try and mitigate DDoS. The problem that we have with existing technology is relatively simple. If you look at what the security products out there today have been designed to do, it's important. They've been designed to stop bad traffic, stop bad people getting in. If you actually look at DDoS solutions, what are they designed to do? They're there to maintain service and access. That actually is at two completely opposite ends of a spectrum. Very, very different. And as we all know, if a DDoS attack does happen and we don't do any mitigation, the old layer 3, layer 4, often the existing architecture in there would be part of the collateral damage. They would be affected. Interestingly enough, a quarter had no protection whatsoever for DDoS. Either they hadn't been attacked or they didn't see it as a high enough level issue for them, or more importantly, they were in the process of looking for a solution. And a very small percentage, again, less than 5%, had any dedicated hardware for that. Now, whether that's because we're not educating them, and that's an issue as well, because I think every vendor and a large number of service providers out there today will admit that the service provider customers don't always understand DDoS, and it's an education method. So let's look at the new attack methods. So we know that the data per attack is decreasing. Layer 3 and 4 detection, those attacks are becoming less effective. Interestingly enough, a report came out last year that data center protection was due to surpass carrier protection. That's interesting. The protection and the granularity is moving. It's moving to different parts of the network. But everybody that I've spoken to and all the reports that I've seen specify layer 7 DDoS as the fastest growing source of DDoS today. Now, layer 7, it's important again to understand that. I was talking with a couple of colleagues earlier. Because layer 7 is so focused and so targeted, you think, oh, surely we must be able to pull that out. We must be able to detect it. Well, again, these guys know what they're doing. So often what they will do is use a layer 3, layer 4 bulk attack and then hide a layer 7 attack within there. You know, different vectors, attack vectors. We see attacks now, many attacks are up to 15 different attack vectors. In other words, they're using 15 different types of attack to either obfuscate and hide the true destination of the attack, or to cause as much damage as they possibly can. This is where they're getting smarter. So, historically, you know, I think I've gone through most of these. The one point that I haven't gone through, and this is where it's being driven from the business and the customers, I always refer to it as human latency. And the problem that we have is, how long does it take us to react to a DDoS attack? In fact, I was with a customer in London yesterday, and he said to me, he said his biggest problem is, you know, they're not choosy when they attack. It could be 3 in the morning, it could be 5 o'clock at night. It doesn't really matter to them. The problem that they have is, how do I make the right people available 24 hours a day to make quick, correct decisions to mitigate? He said, we can't do it. He said, and the problem that we then have is attacks can often be ongoing for sometimes hours before we've even put any mitigation in place. That's a problem. Customers are no longer prepared to accept that. Financial customers, it's more than $10,000 an hour. You know, they've paid for the solution. They want immediate responses. That's given us a good indication as to where the market's moving. So we now start to look at the next generation of DDoS mitigation. What are the customers asking for, and what is technology required to deliver? So first of all, behavioral and heuristic. I can't be signature-based, okay? Whether I'd love to be, which is relatively simple, attacks are not that predictable. The other aspect is, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, the attack data isn't bad traffic. It's just the focus of it is exhausting a resource. You have to understand the resources that it's possible to exhaust, and then you can understand whether it's a potential threat. What's your goal? Your goal is to maintain the service. You have to. We have to detect these small targeted attacks. Now, the one thing when you're monitoring so many things at this level, the only way you can do it and scale to a reasonable level is by having hardware-assisted solutions. Software solutions don't scale. If you start looking at a solution and it is software-based, ask the person that's offering it to you, you know, realistically, will I still have the same performance when I'm mitigating an attack as well as when I'm not under attack? Because those, to an awful lot of people, are two very different scenarios. And I can almost guarantee they'll always quote you the best value. The other aspect of it is automatic mitigation. Remove that human latency. You can't have people 24/7 sat on the end of a phone knowing up to layer 7 and knowing the nth level of detail about your network topology and what's happening. So you have to have some. And you have to remove that threat. So, these new goals. So we need new levels of visibility, as I've said, flexibility in identifying services. Now this is something that's relatively new, and it's often been very difficult to do in hardware, is how can I dynamically be able to identify different levels of critical service? The reason why we say that, I might have a web server that purely provides internal intranet traffic, okay? What's the level of importance? Then I could have a trading server that, if it's down for 5 minutes, costs me $500,000. Do they have the same level of criticality? The answer is no. Any level of DDoS protection you actually put in to protect the service will have a cost associated. You have to make sure that that cost is focused in the right places, on the right services, to keep those services available. That's your goal. Okay. Business reputation is paramount. The reason why I put this in is relatively simple. In all the questions that we asked our customers, this is one of the comments that kept coming back. In the any other comments, what is the most important thing? And they kept saying business reputation. We can't quantify the cost, how much it costs when a DDoS attack happens, but it's important. As I've said many times, no single resource is inexhaustible, and these scalable solutions should not reduce granularity. You still should be able to measure at the level of granularity that you were for one service as you were for 50 or 100 services. So, as I've said, we're not the only people saying it. Existing solutions don't fit everything. One size doesn't fit all. Not one solution will fix everything in DDoS. It's an ever-evolving market. But the other reports that came out in 2011 agreed with everything we said. You know, software general, CPU-based, have limitations on performance. Service-based, there are high upfront costs. And often they will charge you per attack. That makes it very, very difficult to budget and plan. Traditional firewalls and IPSs, they are an exhaustible resource. They maintain state. They have to maintain state for the job that they do. Very often what we see is the FortiDDoS product is actually protecting our FortiGates and other firewalls out there today. So how does the product actually work? I won't go into every one of these. The two most important things is, you know, firstly, you have to pass all of these tests to get through. So it's not just, you know, fail at one, move to the next. It doesn't happen. You fail at one, the traffic just doesn't get passed. Now, all of this is done in hardware and the product is in line. The two most important parts of it, though, are the two bottom sections here. Algorithmic and heuristic filtering, okay? What I'm doing, I'm predicting what traffic should look like, what behavior should look like, down to the nth level of detail. Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you exactly everything that we monitor, because that would be a hacker's, you know, golden dream, because then he'd be able to try and work around it. But what I will say is that it's extremely difficult to fool the system. The system's extremely intelligent. And bear in mind, these are the triggers, not necessarily the mitigation method. And this is something that's had to have changed. We're detecting change in behavior. Once we see a change in behavior of the network traffic, whatever that change may be, we then start looking at what resources can potentially be exhausted. We then can identify and make sure we prevent that from happening. This flexible protection, as I say, we're pretty much one of the few people that do it in hardware, if not the only people, allowing you to define different levels of criticality of service. You have to have that ability, and all of this is done in hardware. So the system builds up a baseline, it understands what the traffic looks like, and it's then able to understand legitimately what normal traffic models look like. We can then identify exactly when a service becomes under threat, what we need to do to protect it, and how we need to mitigate that DDoS traffic. Often, as I said, the system will sit in front of a FortiGate or any other firewall system because they're an exhaustible resource as well. We don't want them being collateral damage or the victim of the attack. The product will identify different destinations, identify different levels of service, and you can specify exactly. Or alternatively, the product will actually suggest the values for you as well. You don't have to do all the hard work. In deployment, we can operate in a high availability mode. That's often required, especially in service provider environments. We're an inline device and we understand that. And if more scalable solutions are required, then we can also supply them as well. You know, we can load balance across multiple, and they will share information as well. So we look at the product itself. So there's three products. The first product is a 1 gig full duplex, and that 1 gig full duplex is whether it's mitigating or not. Yeah. So even if the pipe is full with 64 byte packets, we would continue to operate at 1 gig, even if an attack is ongoing. We then have a 2 gig product and a 3 gig product. So all of these products, either individually or multiples of them, will allow you to protect your services. You're not going to protect infrastructure with this type of solution necessarily. You know, that's what those layer 3, layer 4 devices do. What this product will do, though, is protect your services, which to us is critical, and that should be the goal that you're trying to achieve. I know I've gone through those quite quickly. Just to say, I'm more than happy to take any questions. I'll be with my Fortinet colleagues on the booth. So if you do have any other questions, please let me know. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.